This episode is brought to you by Experian. Are you paying for subscriptions you don't use but can't find the time or energy to cancel them? Experian could cancel unwanted subscriptions for you, saving you an average of $270 per year and plenty of time. Download the Experian app. Results will vary. Not all subscriptions are eligible. Savings are not guaranteed. Paid membership with connected payment account required.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Leah, what were you doing when you heard the news that Google had lost its antitrust case? What was your first reaction? What did you make of it?
Is this for children?
Leah Nylen is a reporter for Bloomberg News.
I was like, oh, holy shit. I was like really surprised. One, because I thought we weren't going to have this for another month. And two, because it was like such a sort of resounding victory for DOJ. It was like not even much of a question.
Earlier this week, a Washington judge ruled that Google's search engine had an illegal monopoly by making exclusive deals with other companies. Basically, Google had so many deals with other tech companies to make Google the default search engine on smartphones and web browsers that no other search engines stood a chance. I mean, when was the last time you used Bing?
Most people, when they heard the news yesterday that Google is a monopoly, were like, oh, yeah, of course. Why is that like a headline, right? But in our legal system, we had to go through this very formalistic thing to determine that they are a monopoly. And now we're going to move into another very formalistic legal proceeding about what to do about it.
While Google's monopoly on search engines may be obvious to most, this ruling could have ripple effects that go far beyond this one case.
There is another Google case. There is one against Meta. There's one against Apple. There's one against Amazon. And all of those judges are going to be looking to his opinion for how he decided that Google is a monopolist and maybe even for what he decides to do with it.
Today on the show, Google's days of being the default search engine might be over, but the Department of Justice's big win is only the beginning. I'm Cheyna Roth, filling in for Lizzie O'Leary. You're listening to What Next TBD, a show about technology, power, and how the future will be determined. Stick around. This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations. So you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI.
At Public.com, you can earn 5.1% APY with a high-yield cash account. 5.1%, that's an industry-leading rate. Plus, there are no fees, like zero, so you can maximize your interest. Because what's the point of earning a high yield if you have to spend a bunch of it on fees? At Public.com, it's just 5.1% APY, straight up, no strings attached. They don't even have balance requirements, so you can deposit as little or as much as you want. And Public provides up to $5 million FDIC insurance. That's 20 times the standard coverage. So, to recap, That's 5.1% interest with no fees, 5.1% interest with no minimums or maximums, 5.1 interest up to $5 million FDIC insurance. Start earning an industry-leading 5.1% APY on your cash. Public.com. This is a paid advertisement for Public Investing. 5.1% APY as of June 17, 2024, and is subject to change. Full disclosures in the podcast description.
The case against Google began towards the end of the Trump administration. That was when several parts of the government were looking into the scale of control big tech had over the U.S. economy.
So the Justice Department started looking at Google amid concerns, actually not about this, about concerns over its advertising technology, that being the technology it has that controls a lot of the online display advertising. But as they were going through sort of the evidence that they got in that case, they came across all of these deals that Google has with various companies. So it has these deals with web browsers like Mozilla. It has them with smartphone makers like Apple and Samsung, and it even has them with wireless carriers like Verizon and AT&T. And in exchange for the browsers or the phones setting Google as the default search on phones or computers, Google gives them sort of a slice of the revenue that it makes from advertising. And that might not sound big, but it's actually a lot of money. In 2022, that was $26 billion. $20 billion of which went to Apple. So it was like a lot of free money for these people. And the Justice Department and some state attorneys general who also sued felt like this really allowed Google to maintain its dominance because it sort of froze out everybody else in the ecosystem. Like Apple's not going to let another search company, Microsoft, or even like a startup take over the position that Google has in the browser, because otherwise it would lose $20 billion of free money. And that just doesn't make sense to them.
There are several ways that Google makes money off of its search engines. Can you explain those?
Yeah, sure. So the most obvious one is whenever you do a search on the results page, the top, there are a lot of ads. So say you are looking for spoons, there's going to be a lot of things at the top offering you places to buy spoons. That's the most obvious and the most lucrative of Google's businesses. It also sells display advertising, which means that this is the advertising that when you go to a website on the open web, be it like a blog or a news site, and they have like pictures or videos that are advertisements, oftentimes Google is the one that sort of sold that ad. And so it takes a cut of all of the sales of those ads as well.
I'm trying to get a sense of the scale here. How much of the search market does Google control? I mean, I'm a self-confessed Google girl. Google to me is synonymous with search engine. I mean, are there other types of search engines out there besides DuckDuckGo?
In English, there are not that many. So Google is thought to have somewhere between like maybe 86 to 90% of the search market in English. In other countries, there are other players. So for example, in South Korea, the number one search is a company called Naver. In China, it's Baidu. In Russia, it's another company called Yandex. And oftentimes it's because they have a different alphabet. And so the search index is a little bit different. So these companies that have been sort of written in the native language often succeed a little bit more than companies have tried to in the US or Europe.
Did you listen to the arguments in this case?
Yes, I attended all 10 weeks of the trial.
Lucky you. Talk to us about what the plaintiffs argued.
There were two parts to it. One, they argued that Google has these contracts to sort of ensure that nobody else is able to gain the same amount of data and scale that they have. Because for a search engine, getting a lot of data is actually pretty important. Like that's the way that Google knows what results to give you, is because they have hundreds of millions of people searching every day, and they use the information about what they click on to decide what is the most relevant result. So Google's contracts sort of locked up a lot of the areas that a rival could have used to sort of gain data and scale. And the second way that they allege that Google was a monopoly is it has gotten all this data and scale and users, and that has allowed it to get a lot of advertisers, because obviously advertisers want to advertise in a place where there are a lot of people. Advertisers also really like Google because when you are searching for something, that's probably like the easiest way to find out what you are interested in. So oftentimes a lot of people, like if you're going to buy something, the first thing you do is you go and do some research about it. And so advertisers love the fact that they can sort of get in to the consumer's purchase journey. We heard a lot about consumer purchase journeys at the trial. And these advertisers rely on Google so much, and it is the really only outlet for this. And so Google is able to raise prices on advertisers with very little recourse, is what the judge found.
Was Google accused of being responsible for any competitor search engines going under?
I mean, it wasn't that like Google like shut them down, but essentially like it took all the oxygen out. So people weren't really able to sustain their business. There was a very interesting person who testified at the trial by the name of Sridhar Ramswamy. He had actually been an early Google employee who helped develop the search engine and stayed at the company for a couple decades. And then he went out and he started his own search startup by the name of Neva. And he testified at the trial that, you know, he had wanted to create this new startup that, because it was not based on advertising, it was a subscription search engine, and it would be able to be more personalized. But, you know, they just weren't able to get the distribution that they needed. You know, like there were a lot of geeks like me who were very interested in search engines, or people from Silicon Valley who were interested in it, but they never really got the recognition that they needed. And part of that was because all of the avenues, like the web browsers and the phone, are taken up by Google. And so it's really hard to get people to switch.
And what did Google say in its own defense?
So Google's primary argument was, you know, people use our service because they like it. All these other companies have set us as the default because we're like reliable and good. And it's not really fair for the government to say we are too good at the job we're doing and we have to let somebody else try. So one of the arguments they made is that, you know, defaults don't matter that much. You can actually go and change which search engine you use in a browser or on your phone. Very few people do, but, you know, it's possible for you to click through all of the screens and do it.
After the break, Google lost. Now, what will the punishment be? And what does the future look like for big tech now that the feds have a win under their belt?
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and SAP. AI is moving so fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Welcome to Dear Artie, an advice column from SAP, where we tackle the tricky questions at the intersection of AI and business. Here's our expert, the technology futurist, Ian Kahn.
Hi, I'm excited to dive into today's question.
Dear Artie, the supply chain has been a friend and foe to my company. Can AI make us more resilient? Signed, Supply Chained to Uncertainty.
Hey Supply, here's how AI in the supply chain can help. AI can massively automate data analytics and understand the movement of your goods. AI can point out weak links, market demand trends, optimal logistics, and other important aspects that impact the top and bottom lines for the business. Take the example of a large grocery chain that has hundreds of vendors spread through the country. In some cases, you may need to reroute shipments to other stores, such as in the case of fresh produce, a good that can go bad very fast. Managing such a supply chain is heavily dependent on the data provided, and AI can help optimize this information so that your supply chain works at its optimal levels.
Embrace AI with confidence. Head to sap.com/AI to learn more.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yep, while you're listening, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, or maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not in some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you can be doing right now. Getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy, and you could save money by doing it right from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save nearly $750 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles on your policy, being a homeowner, and more. So just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations.
Hello, I'm Simon Jack.
And I'm Zing Sing.
And together we host Good Bad Billionaire, the podcast exploring the minds, the motives, and the money of some of the world's richest individuals.
Every episode, we pick a billionaire and we find out how they made their money.
And then we judge them. Are they good, bad, or just another billionaire?
Good Bad Billionaire from the BBC World Service.
Listen now wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Bring us back to this week and the ruling against Google. What stands out to you about the verdict in this case?
There's a couple things. One of them is sort of how decisively Judge Mehta ruled for the government. He didn't accept all of their arguments. There were a couple things in which he diverged from the government, but he pretty much agreed with most of the case, which in antitrust cases doesn't often happen.
Is this the outcome that you expected based on what you had heard during the arguments? Were you surprised?
I was surprised at how much of the government's arguments he took into account. So there was 10 weeks of trial last fall, and then he had decided to delay the closing arguments until May of this year. And it was pretty clear in May that he hadn't made up his mind on some things. It became clear reading the decision yesterday that the government was actually able to persuade him on most of the things he was waffling about still in May. And so, I mean, this is a pretty decisive victory for the government. I think probably better than some of the previous cases that they have brought against like famed monopolists in the past.
The next step is there's going to be a separate proceeding to decide on any possible punishment here. What could Google potentially be facing?
So that's called the remedy proceeding. And that is sort of the fun part because it's about what's going to happen to Google now that it's been found to have an illegal monopoly. So the first thing that I get asked is how much money they're going to have to pay. The answer is nothing. In the US, we don't fine monopolies. They do in Europe. Google has already paid like $10 billion there. But here in the US, we focus primarily on like trying to change behavior. So there's like 3 sort of buckets of potential remedies. And the easiest one, and the one that Google is probably going to vote for, is just get rid of these exclusive contracts that they have. So the judge said it's really bad that you are sort of forcing Apple to make you the only search engine. So Google might say, okay, well, so we're not going to force them to only pick us. They can use anyone they want. And we'll just give them money when the consumer picks us. But the Justice Department is not likely to like that. The second thing that people have suggested is sort of to try and make Google give up the things that it has gained from being a monopoly. And the one thing that people say is most likely there is if Google had to share some of its data. So as I mentioned, like they take a lot of data on what you're searching and then what you're clicking on, and that really helps them improve their search results. So if Google had to share that information with other search engines, those search engines could try and improve their results and, sort of become as good as Google, but maybe they would offer like slightly different features, like they would offer better privacy, or they would like be able to personalize it a little bit more towards you and like what sort of sites you like to click on. And the third one that is, somewhat popular among progressives is the breakup idea. So, traditionally in U.S. antitrust, when there has been a monopoly, the resolution is to try and break it up. So we did that with Standard Oil back in the early 1900s. They did that with AT&T in the 1980s. And so they could try and break up part of Google. The aspects of the business that are most often talked about as maybe being required to be broken off are the Chrome browser. The other option is maybe requiring them to sell off the Android operating system. Google was found in this case to have sort of tried to tie them together by requiring people who wanted the Android operating system to sign an agreement that said that they would make Google's search engine the default. So maybe they should divide those businesses entirely, keep search completely different from mobile.
Google has already promised to appeal in this case, which is not really surprising. But do you think they have a shot?
It's a little bit hard to say. It is not unusual for antitrust cases to go to appeal. For one, that's like the very standard thing. In the Microsoft case, which is the one that has been compared to this one a lot, the judge found against Microsoft at the trial court, and then the appeals court overturned a good bit of that. They were originally going to try and break up Microsoft, and then the appeals court said that they couldn't. As I was talking to people yesterday, though, they said that the way that Judge Mehta has written this opinion is actually pretty legally careful. There's not a lot in here that an appeals court would be able to overturn. And the DC Circuit, which is the court that this would go to, is known for being pretty deferential to prosecutors and the federal government. So Google doesn't stand a huge chance of being able to overturn this on appeal.
Talk to us about where this case fits into the broader antitrust approach the DOJ is taking.
Yes. So this was like really the first of the big tech cases. The Trump administration sort of decided a little bit late in the administration that they were going to look at the big tech companies, and they split so that the Justice Department was going to look at Google and Apple, and the FTC was going to look at Meta Platforms and Amazon.com. And at the DOJ, they had these two investigations going, but they realized pretty quickly that actually the Google one was going to be easier. So they really prioritized the cases against Google. And one has now been going on for 5 years. It started in October of 2019, and now we have gotten, sort of our first outcome. But in the sort of intervening years, we've had all these other ones. The Justice Department just earlier this year finally filed that suit against Apple. And the FTC, which is the other antitrust authority in the U.S., has since filed cases against both Meta Platforms, trying to break it up, and then Amazon.com. So this one was like the OG of the big tech cases.
Are there other companies that seem to meet the same criteria for a monopoly? And if there are any of those looking at potential lawsuits?
Well, the one that a lot of people point out to is Ticketmaster. And yes, the Justice Department sued them earlier this year. There are a lot of similarities, in fact, between this Google case and the Ticketmaster case. In this case, we had all those contracts between Google and the other companies to sort of make it the default. Ticketmaster has similar contracts, really, with venues that sort of require them to use the Ticketmaster software if they want to have Live Nation concerts, Live Nation being the other half of Ticketmaster, which is a concert promoter. The Justice Department has also been looking at Visa, the debit card company, for some of its practices, particularly related to transactions online. United Health, the largest U.S. health insurer, there have been a lot of complaints about it, and in particular, as it has moved into sort of other areas of healthcare. So today, United Health is not just a healthcare company, but it is also has a pharmacy, and it also, actually owns some doctors' practices. And so it's gotten sort of its fingers into all these different areas of healthcare. And there's some concerns that has sort of like made it way too big and sort of too involved in all these different sort of aspects across the healthcare spectrum.
Do you think this ruling will provide momentum for the DOJ in their other antitrust cases?
Well, I certainly think it gave them a lot of energy. Particularly, they're going into their second case against Google next month, now in less than a month. That one starts on September 9th. So to have sort of a big win like this right before they go to trial against the same company, I'm sure was like pretty invigorating to all the prosecutors.
People seem really frustrated with a lot of different tech companies, but for very different reasons. How do you think this ruling will affect consumer sentiment toward big tech companies in general?
I think I said it towards the beginning, like the idea that Google is a monopoly is not something that's that surprising to a general person. Like people were asking me why that was a headline yesterday, because like it's something that you sort of intuitively feel. The consumer sentiment might be a little bit happier that like the government is finally trying to do something about this. The other thing I did hear, though, is a little bit of frustration at how long this process takes to play out. Google is going to appeal, and we're going to have a whole nother proceeding about the remedy. So it's going to be months, possibly even years, before anything actually changes here.
Leah, thanks for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Leah Nylen covers antitrust for Bloomberg. And that's it for our show today. What Next TBD is produced by Evan Campbell, Patrick Fort, and Anna Phillips. Our show is edited by Paige Osborne. Alicia Montgomery is Vice President of Audio for Slate, and TBD is part of the larger What Next family. Now, if you're a fan of the show, I have a small request for you, but it would help us out so much. Please become a Slate Plus member. Just head on over to slate.com/whatnextplus to sign up. We'll be back Sunday with another episode. I'm Cheyna Roth, in for Lizzie O'Leary. Thanks for listening.
If you're a facilities manager at a warehouse and your HVAC system goes down, it can turn up the heat, literally. But don't sweat it, Grainger has you covered. Grainger offers over 1 million industrial-grade products for all your operations, including warehouse HVAC maintenance. And even better, they offer access to experts and fast delivery, so you and your warehouse can both keep your cool. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.